afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you're watching the Muddy Waters podcast. And today we have with us as our guest David Arthur Kay, who is more than this, but at the same time in his past has detransitioning as an element. So wanted to just take you kind of hear your story ultimately. But thanks for joining us first.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Before we get in, I mean, I feel like the world has been, in a lot of ways, like turned upside down over the course of the last, 5 days. And it's don't know that I could have a podcast without bringing up the craziness of everything that's happened over the course of, that time. But here we are, and we will carry on. And I think, fortunately, it's obviously terrible on so many levels. Like, obviously murder is bad. The type of public assassination that they did is horrific and horrendous. The type of person that he was, being like one of the best of us, as I was saying earlier, it's hard to comprehend and understand how anybody could get to a place where they would want to do something like that in the first place, let alone to such a great person, unless you understand, I think, the hatred and vitriol that comes specifically. I mean, there are other facets, but was specifically with the trans issue. And so it's obviously we had, this was planned, weeks ago, to have you come on, but the utter hatred that they have for anybody who doesn't 100% agree with them on everything, to the point where they would kind of take it to this degree, especially because Charlie was the one who was saying the most about it, and he was saying it most clearly, and he was actually convincing people. And so he was an existential threat to them. And even still, it's just hard to wrap your mind around, all of that.
He said it better than I could have ever said it, because he never debated and argued. He just taught. He just gave them the truth, but he also held that respect for them, and they respected him for that. And so, we have to move on. And I mean, there's nothing else to do now but move forward. For everybody, stand up, speak out, push back. That's it. That's all we're supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number one thing is, and that's what's really, I think, interesting and fascinating. Not fascinating is not even the right word, but I think there's two things. And this is a political podcast, so forgive me the Christianity, but we're talking about Charlie Kirk, and so it would be rude not to. He's both Christian and political, and his faith informed his politics and informed his life. And it seems to me like there's like the beginnings of an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, the likes of which we've not seen very often in human history. And it's going to have ramifications that go far beyond simply politics. But it is also going to substantially impact the political realm, because there's two things that I think are happening for people who are like going to churches around the state, in Portland and different places. I think there's been like a surprise by a lot of people of how little, if at all, this was mentioned in some of those churches. Now, that's one thing that's like just mind-bending and baffling, right? Number one. But the other thing that's really interesting, and I expected this, because I saw what was happening in social media and all these other places with all the vigils, and I knew, having done the vigil that we did on Friday, and I didn't do an altar call because that wasn't the point, but I did give people an opportunity and say, hey, if you're interested in learning more about Jesus, like, there are people to talk to, come up and talk to us, And there was one person who was like, I am an atheist, but I gotta look into this. This whole thing has shook me up, and I've got to look into this. And so he's pursuing some things, meeting with pastor, I think this Wednesday. And and there are so many stories like that from around the country. A lot of TikTok videos of people who liked Charlie on the political, but so this, and so that's kind of resulting in more people showing up to churches all of a sudden, and so there's kind of this well, there's not a lot of people that are a lot of churches aren't talking about it, or talking about it very little, but a lot of people are showing up to church, and I think there's some interesting things there. And I didn't plan to talk about this, but I'm just going to talk, and then we'll get into your stuff. But One of those things is, I think, like, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, because I want to try not to get angry at my fellow brothers and sisters over of Christ over the fact that they aren't talking about this. Although I feel like they, to some degree, there's a bit of shame that is appropriate there. But there's a reality of, who did Charlie Kirk target? Like, who was he focused on? Well, he was focused on the youth. And why do I know so much about what I know about Charlie Kirk? Well, in 2020, I started to aggressively pay attention to politics, but still, Charlie Kirk was one of many figures. He probably wasn't even a top one that I paid attention to. It really wasn't until the lead up to the 2024 election that I just, partly because I was trying to build out my own machine to get more information out to the world about politics, that I was getting into all the socials, may it be TikTok, X, Twitter, well, that's the same thing, but Facebook, YouTube, and and Instagram. And really, the main places where you saw so much Charlie Kirk content were in TikTok and Instagram.
Yeah.
And that's because it's intentional, because he knew that that's where you got in front of kids, right? And so, like, to some degree, like, he wouldn't naturally pop up in places where the older portions of the population, and we look at the state of Maine, vast majority of people who are Christians are older. Like, we're an older state in the first place, and the church itself is exceptionally old in the midst of an old state. And so the majority of the people that are going to church are not paying as much attention to that, and they wouldn't have discovered him unless they were intentionally paying attention to politics. And now, again, this gets at a place where we can say, hey, church, what were you doing? Like, you were given the gift and responsibility of being born in the greatest country in the world, and you have been given citizenship, which allows you to impact the outcome of your world. And part of the ways that you do that is through voting. Like, this is a stewardship issue. This is a personal responsibility where you are required to use whatever gifts God has given you for the good of the world and for the good of his kingdom. And so, on the one hand, it's like completely inexcusable that they would not be engaged in this process. At the same time, the church has been asleep. The church has bought into this lie that, in order to help people come to know Jesus, we got to make sure that we don't get too political, because if we get too political, then that might scare people away that we can't then build relationships with. But the issues that are causing that are issues of, like, Satan versus God, right? Where they're like, most of the issues that are so divisive that people are like, are issues of like central and core to being a Christian. And if you can't accept that, then you're going to have, if that's a bigger issue to you than who is the God of the universe, then it's not going to help you in the first place. Charlie, and I'll probably pull it up here in a little bit, but Charlie had done a video shortly before he died. Well, he didn't do a video. I think he preached a sermon, but this is kind of the end of either his sermon or whatever it was, message, speech that he was giving, where he kind of, addresses this in the church where we've kind of like gone asleep, and allowed the secular world to tell us that we can't engage in the public sphere for fear of, again, not being able to reach people for Jesus. And he's like, the truth is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Right. The truth is that when we get out into the world and we're speaking truth into the culture, people who don't know Jesus are looking at it and being like, yeah, that's true. But also, like, the fact that you have the courage to stand up, the fact that you have courage to go out there, it's like, what else is going on here, right? And so Charlie, his ministry, even though his ministry was not called a ministry, it was a political movement, right? But his political movement has led so many people to come to know Jesus, and in his death will lead so many more people to come to know Jesus, because they're going to look at and explore his stuff, and they're going to they're just going to spend so much. I mean, the guy just was not perfect. Obviously, nobody's perfect except Jesus, but one of the closest examples to perfection in how he shared respect for people, how he loved people, while speaking truth to them. And there were some times where he's like, yeah, and you might think that what I just said was really harsh, but the reality is, I care about you. I care about your people that you love. And you need to know
that's how we're supposed
truth
to
is
be.
truth.
Yeah. That's how we're supposed to be, whether it be, if we're going out to lead people or introduce people to Jesus the Christ, or if we're going to the state house to give a testimony or a school board meeting to expose something, right? To expose the wickedness that's going on. That's how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to do it in love, because we were first loved. And so, and if we don't do it in love, then we really just blend in with the rest of the horns and the noisemakers.
Right.
Really.
Yeah. Yep, the angry, upset people,
Yeah,
right? Which,
absolutely.
yeah, right. And we can't do that. Like, and that's what made this, I think, so significant is you had like this. There are people who are rude. There are people who are angry. Who are some people who are even trying to cause, even before Charlie, right? Some people who would be okay getting into an altercation, would be okay like talking bad about people that they're talking to. One of the telling things about Charlie is when somebody came up and they were like saying something that was like either not that the smartest or it was just in opposition to what they believe, people would like in the crowd would want to go after them, and Charlie would be like, no, let this person,
Yeah,
give
let
them the
them
respect
speak.
of
Yeah,
saying what they have to say, and then we'll discuss, we'll aggressively essentially go after the ideas, but we'll respect the person. And he demonstrated that over and over and over again. And that, I think, again, that's why he was so effective. And that's why he's going to continue to be effective.
exactly.
And his voice has been amplified 1,000-fold or more in this. And anyway, I think the
And it should have
other
been.
side is reeling. But anyway,
Yeah, but you know what?
yeah.
It is what it is. I actually know a detransitioner who detransitioned because of his interaction with Charlie Kirk on a
Yeah.
campus.
Yeah.
He said that he's never spoken to somebody that showed him such love and just made it very clear that he wanted him to understand the truth because it was to his benefit,
Yeah.
and so that's all we're supposed to do is just introduce people to the Christ through our words, our deeds, and our actions. We don't have to beat them in the head with scripture. We don't have to do any of that. We just have to speak to them, much like the Christ did, right? Much like
Yep.
Charlie Kirk did, matter of factly, with truth, in love. That's it. It's so simple. It is.
Yep. No, absolutely. And at the event that we had on Friday, I had somebody who decided he wanted to like argue with me, and I jokingly told people afterwards that I was honing my Charlie skills, which I'm terrible compared. Like, there's nobody like one of the nobody's going to replace him exactly, right? There
No.
are there are people who will be able to have good arguments. There are people who will have some of the other skills, but there's nobody that has who he is so encapsulated within themselves. And you know God makes everyone unique, and so we're all different. And so, how we honor Charlie Kirk is using the gifts, talents, abilities that we have, and doing the best that we can, and doing what we can, and not trying to focus on what we can't. Doesn't mean we sell ourselves short. Too many people do that, but I think I was having this conversation, with this guy, and he's like, "Well, do you disagree with everything he says?" And I'm like, "No." Like, I didn't agree with everything that Charlie Kirk said, and I probably would have had, debated with him about, some of his views specifically when he came to Maine. Somebody actually asked a question that people thought it was me that was asking it, and it was like, I've been waiting a long time for my spouse to come here from another country. 2 years so far, for me. But anyway, do you think that there's something we should do to speed up and fix the immigration process? And Charlie Kirk's response is, I think we need to shut down immigration entirely for a period of time until we get our stuff together. And I was like, oh, that's not the response I wanted. Now, it's not the response I wanted, partly because of myself. But on top of that, I don't agree that we should completely eliminate the possibility of people who get married to people from other countries to be able to bring their spouses to this country, right? I think that there's a limitation. Maybe anyway, there's a process while we figure stuff out, but I don't think that's the solution. I don't think I would have to be convinced. I mean, maybe if I had an argument with Charlie, I could get to a place of being convinced, but I wasn't.
You
I've
know what?
not yet been convinced.
They
So
had a process. They had a very good process way back in the day when it first began, right?
yeah.
And somehow that got manipulated and changed, and then it just became a free for all. But
Well, most of the problem with the legal immigration process is just the sheer number of people that are doing it, and the number of people who are trying to like break the rules and find sneaky ways to get into the country. Right. That's a big part of what's bogging down the system. People who have illegally crossed the border and claimed asylum goes into the same system. There's most of the reason that I'm having to wait is not because our government is doing a poor job at their job right now, but that in the past we allowed too many people to come across the border illegally and claim asylum. And on top of that, we've got too many people who are trying to game the system. And, I know this, like I've talked to people, I spent a lot of time in Africa at this point, and I've talked to people who that is literally, they're like one person who is a cab driver, and he's basically like, yeah, I keep trying to get into America. They keep declining my visa. I don't know why. I got all these businesses. I got no reason to leave. But if I did get over there, I would stay. It's like, okay, So, so anyway, all that aside, thanks for listening to my TED talk on on these
Hey
some of these
man,
things.
it's all good. It's all good. I think that we should all really study Charlie
Yeah,
and take some of what he taught, take it to heart and copy and try to not be like him, but do what he did, because it's important.
Yeah, in our own way with our own gifting,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, but let's get to you. So, like, what's your story? Where do you come from? Why are you willing to? And again, this is we're talking about probably the very issue that likely. We're talking openly and publicly. I guess we're not doing it outside, but like for the world to see about the same issue, I think that ultimately led to Charlie's death. So there are consequences. Hopefully, more people wake up. But anyway, this is the topic in particular. There are other issues, but anyway. Why are you here today?
So I spent over 30 years. well, because you invited me, Chuck.
That's exactly right.
I spent over 30 years as a member and an advocate of and for the LGBTQIA trans queer rainbow movement. And 20 of those years, I was transgender. I lived as transgender. I was on wrong sex hormones. I destroyed my body. With those poisons, because that's what they are. But most of all, and most importantly, there is an agenda, and this agenda is very real. And the agenda is not going out the window because of some executive order, right? Or because schools started voting down pro-trans agenda policies, because there's still going to be, as we can see right now with what's going on in the last week, there's still going to be trans activists, teachers, librarians, city government officials, counselors, right, staff that help children with their quote unquote gender affirming care and transitioning. And they're going to do it when they're not allowed to do it openly, they're going to do it in secret. But either way, they're going to do it, because this movement has its talents embedded into local, state, and federal government, as well as, of course, the government school system. It's not the public might pay for it, but it's not a public school. It's a government school system. In society, in culture, and more than any other movement in our history, Chuck, more than any other movement in our history, this is the largest, darkest, most dangerous movement we've ever been faced with, because it has, since the 1940s, it has absorbed the feminist movement, the civil rights movement, the abortion movement, the sexual revolution movement, like all of these smaller movements. It's absorbed them. Look at how we went from Black Lives Matter to Trans Lives Matter, right? That's what this movement does. It's a cult, and I can call it a cult as a victim of it for so many years. I was the targeted, desensitized, victimized, sexualized, and criminalized child victim of this movement, and that was more than 45 years ago. I was also the suicidal trans kid, right? Isn't that one of the biggest things right now? Well, do you want a trans daughter or a dead son? So I was the suicidal trans kid, the same one that's always tossed up into all these debates and these arguments that further the trans queer agenda, right? But what they don't want you to know is that you go from being a suicidal trans kid to being a suicidal trans adult, because affirmation, transition, acceptance, wrong sex hormones, puberty blockers, diversity, equity, inclusivity, all of these wonderful, glitter loving, inclusive things do not remove depression, angst, trauma, pain, brokenness, suicidal ideation. In fact, all of those latter issues are only magnified by the former. And so a lot of people, one of the most, most asked questions with me is, well, how do you really know? Well, my proof is my past. I
Yeah.
am
So tell us about that. Like, start from the beginning.
So my father took his
Makes
life
sense.
just before I was born. I sought out male validation, um, and that's all some people need to see. My one of my first molesters was when I was in elementary school. It was a teacher, and then another teacher, and then the parent of one of my good friends, and then a neighbor. And I started to associate being sexually abused with love, with male affirmation or male validation. Um, and so I actually started kind of looking for it. And so by the age of like 10 and 11, I was sneaking out of the house. I was cutting school. I was going hanging out at bus stops and in public restrooms, just waiting for someone to come along and to show me some quote unquote love. And they always came along because they're predators. This movement is a predatorial movement. And I remember so I overdosed on pills at 13.
Wow.
And my mom, at her wit's end, just took me from South Jersey to Philadelphia, trying to get me away from South Jersey, where the people that I was hanging out with. And when she took me to Philadelphia, she said, listen, I had a son. I didn't have a daughter. Your name is David. You can't be any of these names you're making up for yourself. I'm not going to find girls' clothes or makeup in your school bag anymore. It ends now. You can't do that under this roof. And so I ran away, and I got on wrong sex hormones at age 14, living on the streets of Philadelphia. I was targeted, sexualized, sex trafficked, criminalized, perverted by this cult. This is a cult of suicide and death and pederasty. I was a victim of it. I most certainly can call it a cult. I was also a very quote unquote dysphoric youth, trying to hide in that false identity. Why? Because of all of my underlying issues and comorbidities, right? Because of all the trauma that I had suffered, I had dissociative disorder and took on this gender dysphoric identity. And that's the problem now, is there's all of these youths, especially these young women out there that are getting double mastectomies at 13 and 14 years old. They have underlying issues and comorbidities that have led up to this. They're cutters, they're covered in scars, and these doctors don't want to deal with the issues. They just want to mutilate these children because there's big money, and that's where it always comes from. It's big money because it's big pharma. Big pharma funds all of the trans rights organizations, and big pharma funds all of the gender clinics. Big pharma does. Why? Because they are creating lifetime medical clientele. Not even patients anymore. Now they're clientele. And I've been for years. I've just been stuck on the definition of dysphoria, right? The abnormal condition of mental confusion. Hello, that tells you right there what it is. DYS means abnormal condition, and phoria is of mental confusion. So my announcement to the world is always pay attention. Because not only is this a mental disorder, right? Now it's affecting them. So as a Christian, I know it's spiritual oppression. but it's oppression that's affecting these children mentally.
Yeah.
And it's an emotional investment. See, everything about this movement is built on thoughts and feelings. That's why I say as much as I can, it's a cult, it's a cult, it's a cult. Because I want people to understand that it is a cult, that it becomes every aspect of each of its victims' lives, every single aspect. It determines who your friends are. It determines which of your own blood relatives you'll associate with. It determines your politics, obviously. It determines your residence, where you will live. It determines where you'll shop. I mean, this cult becomes every aspect of your life. So,
well, when you say that it determines it, like, let's just be clear too, like essentially what you're saying is like, so one of the things that's particularly characteristic of a cult is like you can't associate with people who don't agree with the cult, right? And so like your community is complete. If somebody disagrees with you or would question you in any way, they're awful and evil, and you better not talk to them.
Absolutely. I have physically and verbally assaulted people, for merely telling me that I was not a woman, or merely telling me that what I was doing was wrong.
Yeah. So I just want to rewind a little bit, because like, I think you kind of like very quickly went through some like really heavy things. And I just want to like, see if maybe there's I think a better understanding. Cause like it's really, I think, hard for somebody like me to like understand how anybody could come to a conclusion where they would kind of follow this path anyway. Right. Like I've obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but fortunately in my life, I've not been abused by adults and things like that. I was protected from that, fortunately. Great parents that way, and never was in a situation where something like that could happen. But obviously that happened, and like from a psychological standpoint, like obviously you looked for love from primarily older men who abused you. But like, how did you get to the and you mentioned at 13 you took pills. Like, how did you get to a place like what was how did you get there? I guess, does that make sense? Like, how did you?
Yeah, so it does. It does. So I was molested by a family friend for the very first time. And then from there, it was a neighbor, a teacher, another one of my very good friend's father. And
but
so
and I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to make sure you understand the question. Like what I'm kind of hoping to drive at is like, how did that like get you to a place where you wanted to be a different gender and things like that?
So that's one of the best questions, Chuck. It really is, because we think that because there are rainbows above every classroom door and all these teachers have become trans activists, that this is why there's this explosion. Well, this is why I know it's spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was a young child, there was none of that going on.
Right.
There was no promoting of this movement. There was none of that. Now, the teacher that molested me, he told me that I was going to be gay, that I was gay. And then the other teacher told me I should have been a girl, and I was just a nice little girl, and his good little girl. And so when those things happened, I know I feel the same way inside every time I talk about it. But when those things happen, it's almost like it's the perfect word is the mental health diagnosis of dissociative disorder. And so you dissociate from self because being anything other than self seems safer. And then once you're there and you realize it's not, but you see that men are supposed to be with girls and they're all using you in that manner, you must have been meant to be a girl. It's something. That's why I know it's spiritual. It's spiritual oppression. It is absolutely spiritual. It is demonic. And it comes down upon you like that, and you're sincere in it.
Yeah.
Kind of like Saul was before Acts 9, right? Before he became Paul, he was sincere in
Mm.
all that he was doing. He thought he was sincerely working for the Lord and doing everything, but he was sincere, but he was sincerely wrong.
Yeah.
And so was sincere. I sincerely believed that I was a girl trapped in a boy's body. And that's, and so because of that,
Yeah.
that's what lets me know now
So
that it
yeah.
is spiritual, that it's not just a mental issue. It's a very, very spiritual, oppressing movement. So if you take that back 45 years ago, right? And then today, when you have all of these little kids who are broken, why? Because they're coming from broken homes, because they don't have daddies in most of their homes. And mommy may not be a great mommy, and the daddies at our home may not be a good daddy. So they want to belong, hence the name of the ministry, I Belong, Amen. But they want to belong. And when you tell a child that this is the way to get attention, and this is the way to belong, and this is the way to be fabulous and fantastic and wonderful, then that's what they're going to strive for. That's what they're going to push for. Chuck, I remember I used to do the parades. I used to represent nightclubs and businesses in the pride parades. And I remember I was on a float in Philadelphia, and I was I looked down on one corner and I saw all of these Christians with their Bibles and their bullhorns and their signs saying God hates fags, and oh, you're gonna burn in hell. And I remember thinking, I don't want to know that God. And then we get to
Mm.
the end of the parade, and one of the quote unquote churches that was in the parade with us, right, came up to me and said, don't worry about them hateful people. God made you just the way you are. And they
Mm.
walked away, and I remember thinking, I don't want to know that God either. If he made me this way, if he made a mistake and he made me, I'm confused. I'm a man, I'm dressing like a woman, I'm taking wrong sex hormones. I'm a mental case, and I'm a prostitute, and I'm a drug addict, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a sex addict, and I'm a gambleaholic, and all of these things. And I'm saying, I don't want to know that God either. You know, Whatever God, though any of those people were serving, I didn't want to know that God. And
Mm.
so, I mean, so I hope I answered your question, because I think that that's really important, that people understand that this is not just because I seen a thing where somebody shared with something with me, and it said, if you're 18 and you think that if you're an 18-year-old man and you think you're a girl, then you have a mental disorder. But if you're 8-year-old boy and you think you're a girl, then your mother has a mental disorder. And it's not always that. Yeah, there are
Right.
instances of that, but we have three categories of people that fall under this trans umbrella. And these are people who, like the goth and the punk rockers, who jump on every trendy bandwagon, no matter what it is. And then we have the ones that are broken, and trauma pushes them there. But then we have the ones that are AGP, the autogynephiles, the perverted ones that are guilty of heinous crimes against women,
Mm.
who are just perverted. They're cross dressers. They're just perverted. Um, so there's a lot of different people that fall under this umbrella of this trans queer identity. And I think that that's what a lot of people don't understand, because when we sit back and we say, how did we get here, right? How did we
Yeah.
get to where this deviant movement has so many protections right? It has so many legal and social protections. So and so
Yeah.
the questions should be like, one, how did this cult get so many extra special rights? How has this perversion and this blatant attack on children received so many legal and social protections? How has
Right.
this rainbow code gained so much footing so quickly? And why are politicians and lawmakers so intrigued and bamboozled by this movement? And most importantly, how are educators and those who claim to care about children involved in pushing this diabolical agenda? Right?
Yeah.
So let
There's,
me,
there's a lot of levels to that, to those questions, for sure. But one thing I want to highlight, because I think it's and then I'll let you continue. But I think it's like really important to note the impact of abuse, right? That kind of like
yes,
leads to this. And I mean, you have specific elements of your story where you were molested by somebody, abused by somebody who told you you should have been a girl. So like that's exactly what, when we say grooming,
yeah,
that's like the level 9 grooming or whatever. I'm just making up levels, by the way, but that's like a very, but there are others where they, it's more some of the parents where they kind of want a daughter but got a son, and so they want to be part of the trans cult, and so that's the mothers that
yeah. And
have
then there's the Munchausen by proxy, and there's tons of reasons.
but here's some statistics that, again, people can learn stuff just by using AI, but like obviously dig deeper and do additional research. But this is some like quick stuff. Lifetime sexual assault among people who identify as trans, 47 to 50%, which is higher than the normal population. Physical sexual abuse over the course of the lifetime, 39 to 85%, quite a range.
Yeah. So and I can tell you that even the first one is way up. It's way higher.
I think it is way higher, but
Yeah, it is.
one of the other ones that's pretty impactful here is psychological emotional abuse in childhood, 77 to 93%. Another one, any childhood trauma, ACEs, which ACEs are adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
91 to 93% have, and 61% have 4 or more ACEs. So these are all things that are substantially higher than the general population. And so, it's childhood trauma, specifically being groomed, are huge, huge
Oh yeah. It's always
contributing
trauma that
factors.
leads to it.
And then there's also, like you mentioned this as well, but like kind of the stuff, the behind it, and there's a lot more in between, is that the pharmaceutical industry that wants to profit off of it, and the globalists who part of their aim and objective is to reduce the population on Earth, and obviously that's part of this. But anyway, you can continue what you were going to say next.
Oh, no, that's all good. So yeah, it always stems, and the reason I say that the first stat is way higher is because over the last 15 years and the course of my life while I was in that movement, everybody I knew have been molested.
Yeah.
Every single person that I have, I hate the word counsel, right? That I have met and established a relationship with over the last 15 years has been, and in the exception of 2, has been sexually abused. And so these are things. And so even if they're not sexually abused, physically abused, right now they're being mentally, they're raping them mentally in the government schools.
Well, I do think that there is a element to this that men and women are different, right? Obviously, and this is one of the things where we disagree with the other side. Oddly enough, they say men and women are not different, but it's really important that you believe that one transition. Anyway, whole nother story. That's like a little bit of like the psychosis that they have to deal with on a daily basis. I kind of feel bad for them, but not. But like there is a big difference between trans men who seek to transition and women who seek to transition. And I think like that's where I could imagine that there are cases where there's less sexual abuse, but there is an element where they teach girls, right? We had somebody on the podcast who they explained this to her related to her daughter who they believed was a boy, which is one of the things that they teach is that if you're a girl, or if you Like, if you don't feel comfortable in your own sexuality, then maybe you're the wrong gender. And then they say, oh, girls playing with trucks, girls who really like sports, like they say all these things, right? And they're slowly bleeding it in, right?
Yeah.
And then they say again, the whole, if you don't feel comfortable in your own sexuality, and then puberty hits. And I've said that people who watch the podcast before have heard me say this, but the reality is, once puberty hits, and you've been trained to say, if you don't feel comfortable in your own sexuality, well, women start to bleed. For all the men out there that don't understand that is and I don't understand either. Like, that's just a bit of, from what I do understand, is it's an incredibly traumatizing situation. And I can guarantee you, from what I've talked about this with people, is that nobody feels comfortable in that situation. And
Right.
that in and of itself, on top of all the hormones that you start feeling, all the emotions, all the, like,
Oh my gosh! Don't even
you,
get me started on
yeah, I mean, it's
that,
so
because I know
overwhelming
that very well.
that it's really easy to fall into
Yeah.
this trap of thinking I might be. So I think there are a high, probably statistically, and this would be for somebody to do some research on. Maybe I should. A higher percentage of the women who have transitioned are less likely to have had some of the other elements, because it was more focused on
Right. Well, see,
on
grooming
that.
is
But
just as much a psychological act, right,
I
as it
agree.
is a
Yeah,
sexual one. And so the tactics that are used to groom somebody should just be considered abuse, because
yeah,
it doesn't matter if it's a psychological or
right.
sexual, whatever, but it's they always there's always a process, and it is target, desensitize, sexualize, victimize, criminalize, and then weaponize them. And what do we see now? We see a whole bunch of weaponized, very emotionally distraught people that are going out and doing heinous crimes and heinous things to other people, you
Yeah,
know and so and that's where we're at. But I really wanted to put my 2 cents in, um, about how I know about why, or how we got here, right?
sure.
How
Yeah,
is
yeah. Go
this
go
called
for it. I do want to
protection? Right?
continue the story, because eventually you escaped out of this, but continue
Yes,
with this
and
line,
so
and then yeah.
one of the most important things is, like, my proof is my past. As a registered sex offender, I have several prostitution crimes as well. I have several felonies. I mean, just crime in general. So, as somebody who was groomed in, and then was sex trafficked, and then became an agent for my handlers, just not to suffer their abuse any longer. In my late teens and early 20s, I became an agent for my handlers. And so when I broke out from that, and I was working the streets, and then I was a quote unquote call girl in a hotel room, and they would come to me. So the same, how can I even put it? So the same politicians, right, that are protecting, or thoroughly examining this cult, and wanting to just lay out the red carpet for them. These are the same ones that are guilty of pushing the perversion that's gotten us to this just dark place, where children are openly targeted and
Yeah.
openly being sexualized and victimized. They're being mutilated, they're being sterilized, they're being trafficked, right? They're just being destroyed, mind, body, and soul. So, from my own life experience and knowledge, as an ex-gay man, as a former transgender prostitute, as an ex-transgender or detransitioner, please just allow me to give a little bit of insight on this, because I think it's so
Yeah.
important. Um, Being recruited, of course, into the movement, I want us to understand how we have the laws that protect this perversion and this open assault on children. But I think first we have to understand who falls under the trans queer umbrella. And I'm going to say this one time, because, and I don't want people to think that I'm a feminist, right? Because I'm not, but perverted men in power. That is the reason we're where are at. There's a difference between a gender dysphoric and being an autogynephile. And that's a very important distinction because it gives us true insight into who, why, and how. So the trans queer umbrella, right? It covers all of the individuals that identify as trans. But there's a lot of them that fall into that trans category that do not suffer from gender dysphoria. So there's many of them that fall into that trans category that are sexually deviant individuals that suffer serious, I mean severe mental disorders or paraphilias. So there are AGP or autogynephiles. Those are males that are sexually aroused by the thought of themselves as women. They don't want to become women. So either the thinking of themselves as women or just wearing women's clothes, especially undergarments, is what arouses them. And they are not homosexual men. They are geared towards, if there are men geared towards females. Then there's the transvestites, which are males or females that are sexually aroused by wearing opposite sex clothing. There's fetishists, and which is a form of sexual behavior in which the gratification is linked to like an abnormal degree or a particular object, usually a part of the body. Some people with shoes, different things like that. And then, of course, there's what is a paraphilia. So a paraphilia is a condition that's characterized by abnormal sexual desires, typically involving extreme or dangerous activities. Some examples of paraphilias would be pedophilia, bestiality, transvestism, rapists, autogynephiles. And these are the ones that suffer these conditions, but these are the ones that also fall under the trans category. These are the ones that we see shooting up schools. Okay? These are not gender dysphoric people. How does it happen? Men in power. Judges, politicians, local, federal lawmakers, CEOs of huge, powerful companies, actors, Hollywood actors, very influential and wealthy people. And then let's not forget the medical professionals. And let me say that the reason I know this so well is because this was my life for so long. Because these men, these judges, these politicians, these lawmakers, these CEOs, these actors, these rich, deviant men were my clients. When I was a 14-year-old boy dressed like a little girl. Many of these men suffered from one or more of these paraphilias that I just talked about. And these are men that are not standing against the immorality of transitioning, mutilating, sterilization, or butchering of children, even allowing men into female spaces because they themselves, these men in power, are saturated in deviance and sexual perversions. Yes, there are women out there who promote and encourage and push and celebrate and advocate for this cult. But I believe that these women are casualties of the war and they're just trying to get in where they fit in. So the immoral find it extremely hard, if not impossible, to stand up against immorality, even if they disagree with it. So what I'm saying is, when you go to a school board meeting and you have somebody on the school board that you really think is a decent individual, but they will not stand up against this trans agenda, they're probably saturated in deviance and sexual perversions themselves, most likely pornography. It was actually Dr. Judith Reisman. She passed away years ago, of the Reisman Institute, but she has said to me, David, men who are enveloped in immoral acts or perversion are less likely to stand up and fight back against this movement, even if they know it's wrong and it's coming for their kids. So that's exactly what we see right now. We see all of these men and women not fighting for the children
Yeah.
but instead standing up for this rainbow cult, for this movement. And we have to understand why, because I remember when before we became a gender affirming care sanctuary state, the first time they tried to push it through, we did a rally at the state house, and I remember when I testified, I ended with the only person that would push or vote yes on this bill would be a pedophile or a pedo apologist. There's no middle ground. And I said, do not be a pedophile and do not be a pedophile apologist by voting yes on this bill. And that bill was tabled, and then of course they snuck in, the
LD 227, I think is what it was. Yeah.
So
yeah.
But I mean, this is where we're at, and this is how we got here. I mean, we pretty much have seen some really good examples of how do we start turning this all around. But honestly, until we get these men and women now away from the pornography and all of this perversion, there's no way that we could ever stop this movement. And as we can see, and I'm not patting myself on the back, Chuck, but 15 years ago, I said, when I first moved to Maine, I said, they're coming for your kids. They're targeting your children. They're going into your schools. That's not happening. That's not happening. That's not happening. Well, then they started talking about how it's happening, and well, it's not happening that much. Well, from 2015 to 2018, Ellsworth High School alone, I had 2 teachers that worked there that I was very close with, and they told me, they says, only 4% of the student body in 2015 identified in the LGBT movement, but by 2018, 56% identified as a part of the LGBTQIA movement.
At that school?
At Ellsworth High School alone, right?
Yeah, and that includes bi, obviously, to be clear. Yeah. And that also includes people who say that they're non-binary.
Yeah,
which
questioning
is just,
or queer, depending on how you look at it.
Right. That's such a high number. I mean, we recently I shared a clip that was done by the Christian Civic League Maine as part of a conversation that Heidi Sampson had, where she said 32% of kids in the state identify in that category at large. But so 56% is huge, but even 32% at a statewide level. Yes. Even if you want to argue, and I think as a Christian, I think you and I agree, even if you want to argue that there are some people out there that fall into this category, the idea that high of percentages, and just for so many eons and decades, we've just been oppressing these people, and they could never be who they are, which is why we don't have anyway. Even if you want to try and make that argument, the 32% is high, right?
Absolutely.
So it's obviously it's obvious, I should say, that this is something that's bigger than just a natural occurrence. That this does involve grooming. It does involve the schools.
Absolutely.
And it's demonic is what I would say. But let's kind of circle back, because I appreciate all of that. But let's circle back to your story. So you got yourself into this place where you're a teenager. And you're, prostitute, transition, you're pretending essentially to be a girl.
Right.
And how did you get out of that? What was the wake up call? What was that got you to escape?
So, I mean, that was my life. My life was, I was a prostitute every day. I went to the club every day, every night. I was doing drugs every day, every night. I was injecting myself. At age 14, I was injecting myself with the wrong sex hormones that I bought on the black market. I was
because this is drugs before, just so everybody's
this
aware.
Is before it was so easy to get everything right.
Also, one thing I don't think we kind of pushed out there is this wasn't happening in Maine, right? You live in Maine now, but you didn't live in Maine at the time. You were in
this was Philadelphia. Yeah,
Philadelphia,
the big city, right? The city of brotherly love. So, and at 14, I was, I was also HIV positive at age 14.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and that was back in the time when everyone was just dropping like flies around me. All my friends, they were just, oh no, I'm HIV positive, and then a week later they're gone. And so it was a scary time, but it was also a very trying time, because when I started the wrong sex hormones, my mental derangement just blew up. I would walk down the street, I would be happy one minute, I'd be crying the next minute, I would be angry, I'd want to hurt people. Somebody would look at me and say, "You're not a woman." I would attack them verbally, physically, I would hurt them. And it was all because I was emotionally invested in this cult, right? I was I was the poster child for this movement. I didn't just live a lie; I became the lie. And so, in and out of jail as a juvenile, in and out of adult county jail, and then prison as an adult. And my last time in prison, it was a correctional officer. I was transgender, and back then, of course, they didn't put trans in. They didn't put men in women's prisons. So I was in a man's prison, and I was on the rec yard, and there was an officer, and he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Paige." And he said, "No." He said, "That's a girl's name. What's the name that your mama gave you?" I said, "David." He said, "Well, David, do you know God didn't create you to be this way?" And I just kind of looked at him. I was offended, right? I was offended. I was angry. How dare you? Um, and I said to him, "Yeah, you did. Look at me. I do this well." And he said, "No." And I said something about it being natural. He says, "So if it was so natural, how many pills and how many shots and stuff and procedures and stuff did you have to go through to look like that?" And that really disturbed me, right? Because now I was really offended. And he says, "I'm going to tell you this every day because I can." And he did every day or every time he saw me, he said, "Hey, David." And I'd look at him, he said, "God didn't create you to be that way." And he'd smile. And, there was something about him. Um, he offended me, but he wasn't nasty to me. I stood before this man, right? And I really felt like this man cares about me, and he wants me to know these things because he cares about me. Like, he was the first man that I was 30 something years old at the time, and he's the first man that I could ever be sure loved me, true and pure, didn't want anything from me, didn't want to abuse me, use me, kick me while I was down, profit off me, nothing. Just wanted to love me and pour into me ever so freely what was poured into him ever so freely. And so I spent a lot of time talking to him, and I actually sought him out on the rec yard at times. And he told me a story one time. He says, "David," he said, "there was a man named Saul." He said, "This man named Saul was murdering and persecuting and dragging Christians through the streets and locking them up and jailing them." And I was like, wow. He's like, but he thought he was doing the right thing. He says, and then one day he was on his way to Damascus, and guess who showed up? I said, "Who?" He said, "Jesus." He says, and he literally knocked him off his high horse, blinded him so he could see. He said, and the man went from being sincerely wrong to being sincerely right. He went from being Saul to Paul. He says, and you're going to go from being Paige to David very soon one day. And when you get saved, your testimony is going to touch thousands on so many different levels because you've been through so much. And I was just like, okay, whatever. And I got out of prison. I didn't become a man of God. I just kind of, like a dog, returned to my vomit. And 2008, I had osteoporosis so severe. And this is all from the wrong sex hormones. I started wrong sex hormones at 14. By age 20, I was sterile. By age 25, I had osteopenia. And by age 30, I had osteoporosis, which is commonly known as an elderly woman's disease.
But they tell us that there are no long-term side effects, that they're completely healthy. They're not experimental. There have been long tested
and they're reversible. And
they're reversible. Yep, yep.
It's all lies. Irreversible damage. Every single bit of it. Irreversible damage. But I ended up on a walker, couldn't stand up straight, couldn't walk, dragging myself around on this walker. And 2009, I was stricken down with full-blown AIDS. I had infections in my brain and my blood. They put hospice in place, gave me less than 3 months to live. That's when I picked up the word. That's when I was introduced to and I got to experience that I had a father, my father in heaven that loved me unconditionally. And I just poured it all out to him. And I mean, he has touched me, he has rose me up, and he has given me so much life and health and just so much knowledge and boldness and courage and strength. And he's given me everything. And I can say that once you come out of it, you go and you start looking, and you're looking for where can I, who can I go to, where can I go. The church has to get it together. Honestly, the church has to get it together, because these people that are coming out of this cult, out of this movement, are running to the church, and they're not finding what they expect. And then they're just going their own way, or they're going back. Like me, I did ministry for 11 years, and then I got hurt by the church and decided I was going to walk away from that part of the church and doing that ministry, and I was going to try to be a quote unquote gay Christian. And I tried that for about 2 years. Didn't work. God let me know. He reeled me back in. He let me know that I don't need to claim any identities, no labels, no false identities, that I can just walk with him in a right relationship with him. But and just continue to do what I'm doing. Just go out and expose this cult and let everybody know that you're not going crazy. The people that are telling you this aren't crazy. They are targeting your children. They want your children. They want dormitories in the government schools so that they can keep your children 7 days a week. They don't want children and parents together. They want to separate your children.
I think the challenge is for a lot of people to believe. I think to some degree, the lipstick has come off the pig, and people realize, as a result of what just recently happened, where people are like actively cheering the death of this person, right? And I'm making up numbers, so people feel free to say that I'm wrong, because I probably am. But like, it would seem there's a substantial number of people who have been celebrating, right? So like, let's say we just use a number like 15% of the population of the United States. Let's say that that's the number. The reality is there's probably another 15% that feels the same way, but has a little bit of common sense to say, probably not a good idea to say this publicly, right? Like,
Yeah.
they're more tact and more awareness, we'll say. But I mean, there's a lot of people that are very happy that this man is no longer here, right? And so, yeah, again, but part of the reason I bring that up, right, is it's so difficult, I think, for people to believe that the world is as dark as it is. Now, I think historically here in America, we've had this idea of the world is dark outside of America, right? Mm-hmm. But to believe, for instance, that something like this could be happening in our school system at such a nefarious level, that there are so many people that are bought into it, that are people with whom we otherwise would think, oh, they seem like a really great person, right? And again, I think, as to your comment before, this is a spiritual thing, and I think there is an element of psychosis. I think this falls into what Dr. Robert Malone was talking about during COVID, of the mass formation psychosis. Like, there are so many people that have collectively bought into this. There's a lot of people that are not like horrible people. Generally, I mean, it's hard to say that and say that they support this, but at the same time, I've met people that I think are actually genuine people who have simply just bought into this type of stuff. partly because of that mass formation psychosis, not because they want to hurt children, not because they're, but they actually, some of them actually believe it. I had a conversation with a young woman recently who I think is a genuine person. I think she's a little naive on a number of levels, especially this one. And she just has, she's kind of like overwhelmed or over her cognitive thought. I would say her rationality is overwhelmed by her toxic empathy, which is one of the things that they've used to manipulate people into buying into it, is to say, like you said, would you rather have a dead son or a living daughter? And it's like, well, yeah, like
emotional blackmail.
If it's a boy, it's a boy. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't get to choose, but like it's a fact. And obviously the reality we know from the statistics is that, like, transitioning does not reduce quote unquote suicidal ideation. Detransitioning does actually reduce suicidal ideation. That's actually what the data. But they try to claim that it's the opposite.
And let me tell you too, a lot of these numbers that say detransitioners are a lower percentage than they are they're evidently and obviously not true. There are so many more detransitioners that have not been even put into the statistics. Even some that I know personally, that they are still in their clinic that transitioned them. They're still in their records as happily transitioned. And they have detransitioned because, of course, evidently and obviously, they're not going back to the same doctors that butchered them and mutilated them and destroyed their bodies. So anyway, it's but like I said, I think that's the challenging thing for a lot of people, is to believe how dark it is, but also just talking about it. Like, as you started talking about what happened to you, I was like, ugh, like, because it's something we don't want to talk about. I'm reminded of it's in the same category, and I was supposed to have a guy on to talk about this last week, but it was going to be on the day that it was at 4:00. We were supposed to go on September 10th, and after finding out about Charlie being shot and not knowing at the time, what his fate was, although it was pretty evident from the videos that I saw, I didn't think he was going to be able to make it. And so anyway, from that, I ended up canceling the podcast, but it was going to be with a guy who is trying to stop, human trafficking here in the state of Maine. And I remember years ago when the issue of human trafficking first kind of reared its ugly head in my mind, was, back, I don't know, 2008 or 9 or somewhere in that realm, where I kind of like really came face to face with the reality of this horrific trade that still exists. Is like, growing up in America, learning American history, which includes some of European history, you find out about the really wasn't an American slave trade. By the way, that's a false notion. It was an international slave trade. Everybody was complicit, including the Africans, and like the reality anyway. So like, but you learn about like William Wilberforce, and you hear about how they abolished slavery in the British Empire, which largely ended the trade in large part, but you still then had slaves in America, right? So you still had slavery that was continuing to exist in America, and then eventually America and slavery. And you think as an American, you're like, okay, slavery's over, right? And the truth is that slavery became illegal. It didn't go away. And it actually just became much more nefarious. It's good that it's illegal, but yeah, it's kind of gone in a very dark direction. But like, as I kind of became awakened to that, I would start talking about it with people, because it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, right? And people were like, can you stop talking about that? It's like, we as a culture are wimps in a lot of ways, and we're afraid to talk about the things that are difficult. And like, the things that are difficult are the most important things that we could talk about. The idea that we've been pushed on that we shouldn't talk about politics and religion is absolutely ridiculous. That's how we learn and grow. and anyway,
And so anyway, but this is in that same category where people they just don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to think about it because one, it's overwhelming and it's like horrifying, and people don't want to think about things that are overwhelming and horrifying. We as a culture also like want to avoid funerals and talking about death because it scares us, and I think a lot of this is a spiritual thing, as you've kind of talked about, is because we don't know where as a culture, not myself, but we don't know where we're going, and so like there's this fear of these things, and then with something like these other issues. And again, this is where I've been saying on this podcast for a while, as it comes up, that I think that in order for us to fix our country, in order for us to fix our state, we need a spiritual awakening. And I didn't expect what's just recently happened, but I think it's coming. But because this issue is more than just political, it is more than just we need to get the right policies. Well, part of the reason we have the wrong policies is because we've abandoned religion, but also there is a darkness and a fear. Like people don't want to talk about things; they're afraid to talk about things because they don't have this sense of, in this trust, in this belief in a quote unquote higher power, to use AA's language, but in a God that actually has it all under control. And that even as horrific as it sounds, eventually he is going to make it right. So in some ways in our lifetime, in other ways, not until he returns. But without that, it's hard to be able to engage in some of these topics. It feels overwhelming. It feels, impossible and hopeless. And I think that that's part of the reason that I think people don't talk about it, and believe it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the same. So on the same level, right, is the disinformation that's being poured in.
There's that as well.
All of the people, right? And so even when I go to like a school board meeting or the state house or something like that, when all I hear is disinformation being regurgitated by somebody that was force-fed all of this nonsense by this movement, right? And the people promoting this agenda. So they're force-feeding, especially the youth, this disinformation, and then they stand up and they regurgitate it. And that was why Charlie Kirk was so amazing at what he did, because he didn't just allow them to just regurgitate it as fact and then move on like it was okay. He questioned them about it. And that is what I have found, that if you start asking them, I mean, perfect example, I was down the waterfront, and this young woman walked up to me, and it was obvious she didn't think she was a young woman, or she didn't want to be a young woman, but she was a young woman. And she walked up to me. She said, "You got a cigarette?" And I was like, "No, don't smoke." And we just got to chit-chatting, and she said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I was just kind of walking around." I said I was handing out some of my books. I said, I don't have none. I have some back in my car if you want one. And she's like, "Well, what's your book about? What's your story?" And so I kind of just gave her some bits and pieces of my testimony about being trans-identified and all this. And she was looking at me, and the way she was looking at me was like she was getting angry. But when I sat down at that table and just, same level ground, and she just kind of relaxed, and we talked, and she's like, "Well, I feel like a man." And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question." I said, "What does a man feel like?" And she just looked at me, and she didn't, and her mouth was like, I said, "I know that you can't answer that question." I said, "Because I once said, I sincerely feel like a woman. But it was absurd because I couldn't possibly know what a woman feels like, having never actually been a woman." I said, "So you can't possibly know what a man feels like, having never actually been a man." I said, "So who did something to you, or who told you this?" And of course, yeah, her life was full of tragedy and abuse, and she went through the government school system, and this is where she got everything that was force fed into her, was from the school system and by the people who promote this wickedness, this rainbow cult. And so these are the things that we have to ask people, like, so you feel like a woman? So what's a woman feel like? And that was why Charlie Kirk was so amazing at what he did, because he would say, like, well, I don't get that, so what is queer?
Yeah.
And through just one video I saw just this morning, it was like, through all of it, right, this young woman could not tell him what it was to be queer, because she didn't even know. She was just told, this is what you are, or here's your spectrum pick. And that's what's happening. And I just wish that people would get it, because children have no idea. They don't know whether to scratch their watch or wind their backside. They need guidance, and if they can't trust trusted adults, then who can they trust? It's, I tell people now, and I know that there's a lot of people that don't agree with me, and I know that I tick a lot of people off, but anyone that sends their child to the government school system at this time right now, I believe, is an unparent and does not truly care about their children. Because
I think that's probably aggressive, and I probably wouldn't quite. But I like it. I think it depends on the particular school. The school that I grew up in, I mean, especially at the time, I can't speak for where it's at now, but I do think there are a lot of questions that I would ask no matter where I lived. If I were, but there were probably places where I would consider sending my kids to school. But it's hard. It's hard right now. Like right now, I especially where I live in Westbrook, and we're in in one of the most. There are more liberal, but in one of the most liberal, town cities in our state, in the midst of a very liberal area, and I guarantee you, there's a lot of stuff going on, and so like I would have a hard time here. I do think there are some places where I think I could feel more okay with that, but generally speaking, it's a big question that parents have to ask for sure. I don't know that I go so far as to say that somebody's a bad parent for allowing their kids to go through the public school system.
Yeah, but I don't have kids, so I can say
it's aggressive. Well, I don't have kids either. I have nieces and nephews, and none of them go to school in Maine. So, but it's like the reality is our schools are that bad. Like, I mean,
yes, they are,
in the sense that, like, number one, they don't teach anything that's helpful for the kids actually being prepared for life. I mean, we're the worst in the nation, or one of the worst in the nation, very close in some ways and the worst in others. And we're one of the highest in the nation in this business when you talk about, how many kids are identifying this way. So it is a very scary place. I do think, like I said, there are probably some school systems where, I'm connected with like a couple of teachers or a couple of former teachers in the public school system, and some that are current teachers in the public school system. And there are ways to navigate that, and there are places that you can go that I think are better than others. But it's a question that I think every parent should ask: is like, what is in the best interest of my child? And I have to ask the question: if the best interest of my child is not to go to public school, I got to figure out how do we then educate?
There's so many options right now. There are so many things out there right now.
Yeah,
that, and I tell everybody, listen, I'm like, if you don't believe that there's an agenda and that they're targeting your children, then you can look these things up yourself, or you can go to my website and you can click on resources, and you can go down to the agenda of the trans, queer, homosexual movement, and you can see there are 4 key things. The 1972 Gay Rights Platform, which happens to be the year I was born, and that was the year they laid down this gay rights platform that changed everything. And then there's something called the overhauling of straight America, which was their agenda. And if you read that, you'll see every little thing on that agenda has been fulfilled. Then there's something called the Homosexual Manifesto. And even though they call it satire, if you read it, you'll see and know that it's not. The first line of the Homosexual Manifesto says, "We shall sodomize your sons emblems of your feeble masculinity, of your shallow dreams and vulgar lies. And then the last line in it, it says, tremble, hetero swine, when we appear before you without our masks. And then, of course, after that, the last one is the platform of the 1993 March on Washington for the LGBT equal rights and liberation movement. So those are things that people really need to either look up or go to my website, check them out, read them, and see that, oh my, there's an agenda, and
well, I do think that I think there's a degree of difference between the LGB and the T, right? And primarily what we've been talking about today is the T.
right.
I think if people want to check out your website, feel free. I think there's probably some great resources there, but I think there is a difference between these two groupings to a degree. Anyway, it's there's a lot of darkness, in our world is the short version. And I think as we've kind of talked about the spiritual element, like the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places is kind of what's leading and guiding it. I think the more that we can learn about like data and statistics, that was, again, going back to Charlie Kirk, that was one of the things that he was the best at, was knowing all the facts and statistics and being able to speak about it openly and clearly in a way that people can understand and realize. And so I think like doing the most that we can to like get educated on some of the details, and not just from what comes from the mainstream media or the medical journals and things like that of these people who are corrupt and owned. I mean, I know situations where there are people who give surgeries to 12-year-olds, things like that in the greater Portland area, and they're not ideologically on it. They're just like, I can make some pretty good money doing it, and so like there's a lot of darkness around this issue.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'm sorry that you had to go through it, taking time to talk about like what happened to you, and I think like as evidence of the reality of this situation. Obviously it was before they were pushing it to the degree that they are now, but there is still hope. We can turn the dial. I think that's the one thing to be mindful of, is to continue to get involved, continue to engage.
We've been given a reprieve,
and awesome. Let's hope.
We had better not squander it away.
Yeah.
We better act. We better stand up, speak out, and push back. And that doesn't mean grab baseball bats and go out and beat people up and hurt people, because these people are not only redeemable, but they're in need of redemption. They're not only forgivable, they're in need of forgiveness. And that's something that we really, and I know it's hard for some people to say, well, I can never forgive, a child murderer, but thank God he can, right?
Right. Yeah. 100%. I mean, I think that's the point. Yeah. So, well, cool. Well, thank you. I think once again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story about like how this stuff happens, because I think your story, unfortunately, is not uncommon in this. I mean, I think that this is not how every child who thinks they're the opposite gender gets there, but especially because it's now become a social contagion, but that this has been happening and it's not good. It's not, and you weren't fulfilled, you weren't happy. It wasn't until somebody affirmed the truth of who you are and encouraged you in that kind of helped you find your place, so to speak. So thanks everybody else for watching. Be on the lookout for the short clips. Like, share, subscribe. Check out our store where you can now buy coffee. If you want to buy coffee that's Muddy Waters coffee, it's actually not Muddy Waters coffee, it's Clear Stream Coffee Co. So that's kind of over against the Muddy Waters. like we're trying to provide a clear stream. So if you want to support the podcast, that might be a great way to do it. But also be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you back here tomorrow, where we're interviewing a young man by the name of Forrest. He is has an interesting story as well, where he grew up very liberal, and his path to conservatism actually started hate watching, as he called it, Ben Shapiro, and then he came to a place where he's like, he actually says some pretty good things. I should probably, and he slowly started down the path toward conservatism.
Wow.
Through that. So be sure to come and check us out tomorrow, and we'll see you all then. Thanks so much. Thanks again, David.